If you start school at 6 months old, 100 years from now, they'd have this whole curriculum on how to teach a kid how to walk and what the best way to do it was. And I think some people hear that and they hear about Waldorf and they think it means just like
passive.
They're passive and they're not really caring about their child's education. And I would say it's the opposite. I'm looking at the long game. I'm not looking at the short term. Oh, I'm going to feel better because my kid can read right here, right now. Waldorf is over 100 years old. This philosophy of education has withstood the test of time.
Okay, welcome to the Under the Oak Acorn School podcast. We have some exciting news to share with our listeners and viewers. We recently have launched our gorgeous curriculum. So right here I'm showing off our bats theme, and we have spiders, and they're like gorgeous. Every page is incredible. Like we have our little diagram of the parts of a bat, and I'm very excited about this.
I'm so excited. We partnered with Katie from Whole Childhood Collective and Miss Olivia. So it's a combination between Acorn School, Katie, Miss Olivia to create this. Miss Olivia's weekly stories and songs are in the curriculum. And then Katie fleshes out a lot of other educational information about our units and she designs them and they're so pretty. So it will be live on our website by the time this podcast is out. If you would like to go purchase it, you do not have to be an Acorn School member to purchase this curriculum. So yeah, it's a digital download and hopefully we will work on a way to also offer a printing solution in the future for people who aren't members. Currently, members get this within their membership.
Yeah.
They get the curriculum and they can either digitally download it or they can pay for a print subscription. So we just wanted to start there that this is live on our website and it's beautiful and it will be happening every month. So every month there'll be 4 new units, usually seasonally themed.
Yep.
With whatever is going on. So very exciting.
And also just to sprinkle in a little extra, we also have some parts with Spanish as well.
That's true.
From our Spanish teacher, Miss Patty. We have vocab and some of the pages, like the anatomy of the bat is in Spanish, and the vocab cards.
These ones aren't cut out, but
gorgeous. Yeah, they're not cut out, but they're really pretty from the spider collection. So we got a lot of good stuff in there, all jam-packed.
Super exciting. And when this comes out, it will be Halloween week. And there also is a Halloween unit and a ghosts unit on the website. So today, what we're going to be talking about actually, it's kind of funny because Acorn School has started as a Waldorf-inspired program. But it's funny, we get a lot of people that come that don't know what Waldorf is. And they're kind of like, well, what is Waldorf?
Yeah. What's happening?
They come to us because they want to be in the nature or they see the crafts that we're doing, the projects we're doing, and they decide to join. But some people don't really know what Waldorf is. Some people know a little bit of what it is, but we thought we would just give like a general explanation today of what is Waldorf, what are the main principles and themes, and how we adapt those to Acorn School. Yeah. And this is also going to be a 2-part episode. So we are going to start with what is Waldorf. And then in 2 weeks, you will also be able to we're going to do an episode about my experience going to a Waldorf school and then eventually going to public school. And so, yeah.
Yeah. So this is part 1 of part 2 of what is Waldorf.
What is Waldorf? So should we get right into it?
Yes, let's do it.
Okay. Should I start?
Yep.
All right. So let's start with a little bit of the history and also a disclaimer.
Yep.
Waldorf, in order to be a true Waldorf school or a true Waldorf teacher, you do have to go through a Waldorf certification program. So if Emilirose, for example, back in her teaching career, she finished her undergraduate degree in education, early childhood education. In theory, if she wanted to be a Waldorf teacher, an official credited Waldorf teacher, she would have then gone on to another program to learn all of the Waldorf techniques. So that's just a plug to go. In order to be an official Waldorf school or an official Waldorf teacher, you actually have to have certain training, which is another reason we are Waldorf-inspired.
Yes, because I did not do that.
She did not do that. And I also do not have a teaching degree or that experience as a Waldorf trained person. We've done our own research and I have my own personal experience, and that's how we've become Waldorf inspired, and we're going to share with you. So that's our disclaimer. We are not experts.
Nope. The word inspired is our favorite word. We'll say it all the time, every day.
Yes.
Everything is inspired.
We are Acorn school experts.
Yes.
But we are not experts in actual Waldorf education. So a little bit about the back end. Waldorf was started by a man named Rudolph Steiner, and he was born in Austria, actually. He's an Austrian educator, philosopher, scientist, artist, biodynamic farmer,
Did so many
education
things.
specialist. He was like amazing, right? He just had a lot of different
Expertise.
expertise in holistic education and other things. And one of his followers owned a cigarette company. And he wanted, it's kind of funny, the first Waldorf school, if you didn't know this, started in a cigarette factory for the workers' children. And their goal was actually to bridge social classes. So Rudolf Steiner and the cigarette factory owner, who was his follower, we want to develop an education system. We want to develop a school or a way to bridge social classes so that these factory worker children could
Not
level
just
up
be,
not
they wouldn't
go
just be more
straight
factory
into the
workers.
factory.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was the goal of Waldorf education. This is just my take too. I don't know if the general Waldorf community would agree with me on this or not. But when I was doing research, I realized Rudolf Steiner died only 6 years after the first Waldorf school started.
Oh, that's right. That's wild.
So
soon.
Waldorf is, over 100 years old. It started in 1919 and it's 2024. So this philosophy of education has withstood the test of time.
Mm-hmm.
But it's interesting because Rudolf Steiner's influence was only really there for 6 years in the beginning. So in my opinion, there's a couple things that happen because of that. Because he's Austrian and everything is translated from German. I think a lot of people have a hard time understanding Waldorf philosophy because of the language barrier. And when it started, he wasn't planning that this was going to be here in 100 years in 2024 in Arizona. It's the culture and everything was so different back then that I feel like when you do research on what is Waldorf, it's almost like seems really obscure.
Yeah.
And abstract, and it's kind of a little bit hard to understand. And in my opinion, it's because it was only around for 6 years before he died, and then it's been adapted by more and more people and their interpretations of Waldorf, of Rudolf Steiner's lessons and philosophy, and then it's other people's interpretations of that, and there's the language gap. And some of the research I did said also that Rudolf Steiner had a very dry personality, dry sense of humor.
Oh.
And so when you're reading the books about it, because I've read some of his books, a lot of them are adapted from lectures with a German person that has a dry sense of humor.
Yeah.
So when you read the book, you're kind of sometimes you're like, what is he talking about? Why is he saying that? And then other things stick out and you're like, wow, that's really
very insightful.
Interesting. That's very insightful. So for me, I think that's partly why the general public kind of goes what even is that?
It can be overwhelming.
I think that's
and
confusion.
hard to shift through all of that and figure out what you're supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think people don't realize that. They just go, why is this hard to understand? It just must not make sense.
Totally.
And then they move on instead of really diving into why it has been around for so long and why it is such a interesting and well thought out and really fantastic way of educating children.
Well, yeah. And one of the main things that I love about Waldorf education is he was very intentional about focusing on the development of a child. and how it pairs with their ability to learn. Like, that's huge. That I love that. That's like one of my favorite things.
Yeah, I think because he was an educator, a philosopher, a scientist, an artist, he took all of that information about human development, child development, the way the world works, and he put that into this first school.
Yep.
And then everything, like I said, has been adapted since then. So that's just my note, and maybe somebody would disagree with me, but that's why I think it might be a little bit hard to understand the background. It's just like when you talk about Montessori, like a lot of people don't know where it started and where it came from, and that Maria Montessori developed the Montessori education for orphans in an orphanage.
Yeah, because they didn't have anybody.
They didn't have anybody.
Them, so they needed a way to learn.
Everything was so independent, do it yourself, hands-on education. And so I think it's always just important to understand like where a philosophy came from. And I think it's really cool that the Waldorf philosophy came from, let's bridge social gaps. Let's help these children develop to be whole people that can go out into the world and make a difference and not just live the same life that their parents lived and maybe not have a lot of money or not be very successful. But
almost give them the empowerment to be able to be like, make their own decisions and not feel like they're trapped in what they were born in. Yeah.
The point was to really let these children grow into the whole people that they're supposed to be, which kind of gets into, let's talk about it. What is Waldorf education? What is the philosophy? We just talked about where it comes from. But Rudolph Steiner had, I think, a few principles and modalities that were really, important. And one of them was that everything was based on what you said, holistic child development.
Yep.
So when we say that, it was the emphasis on what we talk about all the time in Acorn School. And I'm sure everybody that's listened to this podcast has heard this, but emphasis on it being the whole child, intellectually, emotionally, socially, physically, spiritually, that the education was focused on this whole person, not just their cognitive knowing.
And I like the 3 words that they use for it, the head, heart, hands. I think that's so sweet.
I think that's a perfect thing to go into. That's the developmental stages that Waldorf talks about. So in traditional Waldorf schools or traditional Waldorf education, they have 3 developmental stages that children start and grow into. The first one they call the hands stage, or they call it the willing stage. And that goes from ages 1 to 7. And obviously it can like give or take, or 0 to 7.
Depends on the child. Yeah.
But why they call it the hand stage is during this time in childhood, children learn through doing things, through experimenting, through being hands-on. And they do learn from doing something over and over and over and over again. So for example, a 1-year-old, how do they learn how to walk? They try it over and over and over again and they fall. And they try it again and they fall. Nobody sits there and explains to a 1-year-old, this is how you walk. And this is where your foot goes. And this is where your next foot goes. And if, they just try.
Because they have a willingness and a want to do it.
And
they figure it out.
That willingness.
Yeah.
And it's all about really learning to develop that willingness. Because if you never learn to develop that, if you're not spending those first 7 years doing stuff constantly, learning, testing your limits. How high can I climb in a tree? How far can I jump? What can I do? How long does it take me to do this puzzle or whatever it is? If they're not focused on doing that, what can happen is that they never develop that ability to will something into being. So for example,
and with that, like willing, one of the other things I love about the Waldorf is the concept around mistakes and how instead of it being like a scary thing that you make mistakes in the Waldorf like education community, because you're trying all of these things as like a child, you will make a mistake and it's okay. Like you can sit there and think about it and figure out a way to fix it or if you need to redo it and there's no like pressure or like, God, like you made a mistake. Like, how could you? You know, it's just like it's part of life. It happens. Figure it out, move on, and we got it and keep going.
And they talk about that a lot with handwork projects, right? When you're learning how to sew or to knit or to crochet.
Yeah.
It's a really willing, like hands-on
tangible,
way to go. If you make a mistake, you can go back and fix it. And knitting a scarf takes a really long time. That's why the handwork is like you are going back and doing it over and over and over and over again. And that really helps you learn how to will something into being, right? How to create something that wasn't
with
there
mistakes
before.
And without. It's really cool.
Yeah. So the first stage I love, and I love that quote that's like, I think I just said this on another interview, but that quote you see is if we started school at age 6 months, people would think you needed school to teach a kid how to walk. You know, they would assume that once in 100 years from now, if you start school at 6 months old, 100 years from now, they'd have this whole curriculum on how to teach a kid how to walk and what the best way to do it was and all of this stuff. And I think what we've forgotten is that until children are 7, really what Waldorf says is that they should be playing outside.
That's where the nature component comes in too. Yeah.
Playing outdoors is the best thing for a child before the age of 7. They will learn so much from being in their natural environment, testing their limits, creating things, building things, playing with things. That's what they need to be doing developmentally.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there would ever be an instance where a child was playing outside and they wouldn't get something out of it. Like there's just so many things to be trying, playing with, figuring out. Like nature just provides all of that all the time. It's so cool.
And just to note this, we just had our first week this week of our outdoor classes again.
Oh my gosh.
At Acorn School.
Yeah. Magic. I honestly forgot how magical it was until we were back outside and I was like, oh, nature. Yes.
Oh yeah, that's
the
what
best.
it feels like.
Yeah.
Because
not that we do. We love being indoors. And we have to be because where we live in Arizona, it's like living on the surface of the sun during summer, and it's lasted longer this year.
Such a long summer.
So we finally were able to go outside, and it was a huge difference.
Okay,
our nature
what I
walks.
noticed the difference. So I walked in. I was a little bit late. It was so much quieter.
Oh yeah, very calm.
When you're inside, there's walls for noise to bounce off of, number 1. But number 2, I think there's something about the children being indoors. They're like, like they just are bounce off the walls. They literally bounce off walls. Whereas when you're outside, there's no walls to bounce off. They're very peaceful. Yep. I could hear birds chirping.
It was lovely.
It was so nice.
So serene.
And so I noticed that. I also noticed for us moms that have babies, little ones, the gym is amazing for all ages, including babies, but there's a lot of walls where you can't see your baby if they like walk away.
Yes.
So I'm constantly like making circles around the rock climbing gym, chasing Goldie around. And it was so nice to be outdoors and I could just see her.
See everything.
I could walk away from her. I can see her over there.
Yeah.
And she was so content, just like sitting and playing with sticks and stuff. And kids just have this level of contentment, in my opinion, when they're outside in nature that I think no matter how amazing the indoor environment is,
nothing competes with outside.
No, the fresh air.
No, I mean, like just even watching the kids, like kids would arrive and within a minute, they were off doing something in the bushes or up in the tree or with each other. And it's just so sweet to watch them just explore and figure out new games. And it's just really
so
cool.
Peaceful.
Yeah.
And I felt like the circle times were like more focused. I don't know why. They just were serene and focused. So it was lovely. I just wanted to say that. So our classes are held outdoors for all ages, but it's very important for those little ones to just be in nature as much as possible. So if you're Waldorf homeschooling and all you're doing is hanging out outside with your kid most of the time, you're doing a good job. That's basically what you need to be doing in the beginning.
Yeah.
And this kind of goes into the little anecdote about losing teeth. So
I thought this was so cool. I was like, oh, this is like the perfect way to measure
Yeah.
when they're ready.
Rudolph Steiner said, and based on all of his knowledge in the world, his gatherings, that the developmental shift, so we say generally till age 7, right? But he said that the developmental shift really happens, that children are ready for higher level learning, or not higher level, but the next stage of developmental education starts when they start to lose their teeth. So I think it makes a lot of sense, because I think our physical bodies do reflect our states of being. I think we're designed that way, to be a physical and a spiritual and an intellectual being and an emotional being, and they interconnect. And I think that's a lot of what Steiner studied, was the interconnectedness between the physical and the spiritual and the intellectual. So that's what they say is when kids start to lose teeth, and that range is really wide for some children. So I think that's interesting too. And that it would be so cool if there was a study on this. I don't think there is, but it would be cool if there was a study for children that lost teeth younger, if that did reflect that they were ready to read or things like that. So that's also a good thing to check out if you have a child in their younger years. If they're starting to lose teeth, maybe they're at a stage where they're ready to start introducing some more of the reading, writing, arithmetic type things into their life. Because what Waldorf also says is, like, basically prior to that, you do not need to really worry about those things. Those things, obviously, if your child is like self-directedly reading or doing these things when they're 3 years old, like, okay, I have a friend whose child did that. I mean, she fully taught herself to read at 3, just completely.
That's really cool.
You know, if your kid's doing that, they're obviously ready to do it. Yeah. That's what they're supposed to be doing. That's what's so amazing about, human
It's based off of each individual.
But in general, they say, once your child starts losing their teeth, that's when you want to check in, I think. And that's where I'm at actually in our journey as homeschoolers. Is Charlie has lost 4 teeth now, and we're just kind of starting to check in on, some introducing reading, writing, things like that. Nothing intense, but it's just kind of, we're starting.
Well, I've even noticed like a shift with him since when we started Acorn school. Yeah. Charlie, when we started Acorn school to Charlie now, like, you can tell he's getting there. Yeah, he is. And he's like, I can tell his brain is like getting to the point to where it will want and crave that type of higher level of learning.
Well, which is, I'm glad you pointed that out, because that's the intrinsic motivation stuff that we talked about in the flow state episode.
Yeah, like even take like form drawing. Watching Charlie form draw is like the sweetest thing. Yeah, he will sit there and he'll take his time, and he's really interested in it, and he wants to look at the shapes and like copy them, and it's really fun to be able to watch him be into that.
And I think that's so important to not be, I think that's a big part of the Waldorf philosophy, is because you're looking at their spirit also, you're not trying to force things upon somebody who isn't ready for them.
Yeah.
And that's what our culture has done, is they're doing it younger and younger and younger.
Which is so funny to me, because whoever does anything well being forced, I feel like naturally as humans, if you're forced to do something, you're kind of like, ugh. Like,
you don't want to.
Gross. Like, I don't want to do that. Like, you almost get like rebellious, And so I can only imagine, like, well, I can't imagine because I was in it. but yeah, trying to get kids to do something that they don't want to do is, no, it's not
fun.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean, I think some people hear that and they hear about Waldorf and they think it means just like
passive.
They're passive and they're not really caring about their child's education. And I would say it's the opposite, actually, because I'm looking at the long game. I'm not looking at the short term. Oh, I'm going to feel better because my kid can read right here, right now. I know that my kid will be able to read when he's ready. And I think I was listening to something today. It was just some other podcast or something. And they were talking about, like, when our grandparents were in kindergarten, they were not teaching reading.
Yeah.
Even when our parents were in kindergarten, what they were teaching them was very different. It's in our culture has sped these things up and made them younger and younger. They have changed where the goal is. They've removed
I have an opinion on this. I have an opinion on this from being in public school. Just this is my observation and my opinion. It's not fact or anything. But okay, this is my theory. I feel like the public school system has had to start sooner with those things because they keep increasing the amount of children that are in each class per teacher. Okay. And this is also why a lot of people have the stigma that they're like, oh my gosh, like, why aren't homeschoolers like starting school, or why are they out and about doing things? Like, why aren't they at home like learning? Well, because there's only like 3 to 5 kids, that the mom is
Doesn't
having
take that
to.
long.
No, it doesn't take that long. You have to have 6 hours of school in public school because there's 25 to 30 children per teacher, and you're trying to get all of the information and make sure everybody is learning it. So it takes so much time.
Easy though. And
Yeah.
since the children aren't ready, I also think a 5-year-old, 4-year-old maybe isn't ready
Yeah.
to be learning what they're learning. And so then they're stamped with what? Disability, educational, developmental disorder. And this is something we'll talk about in the next episode, but kind of how that is looked at differently in Waldorf education.
And the other thing too, which has always been really fascinating to me, specifically in kindergarten. Okay, so kindergarten in our state isn't required. You have to go to school. You have to be doing some sort of school for first grade. But for kindergarten, it was always really interesting because when it comes to boys and girls, it's scientifically proven that boys sometimes need a little bit more time. They actually would do better if they waited like another year before they started, because girls' brains just are a little bit faster. And so you could really tell the difference sometimes with kindergarten.
Sure.
Families that decided to wait to put their boy in school like that extra year, totally different than the one that came in like early. Yeah, younger. It's really fascinating.
Yeah, I think there's a lot we can kind of get into about that first 7 years.
Yeah,
I
no,
feel
that's not like
so
every
important.
boy and girl. Obviously, there's going to be some that are a little different, but it is like scientifically like studied and stuff that, boys' brains were just a little, I don't even want to use the word. They just took a little bit more time, which is really interesting.
Because I think what they're supposed to be doing is
Yes,
they're supposed to
playing.
be developing some other parts of their brain,
Yeah.
which involves movement. That's another big thing that they talk about in the first 7 years is that children need to be moving.
Yeah.
They do not need to be sitting still.
Yeah.
They need to be up, running around, climbing trees, throwing rocks, going all over the
That's
place.
actually a very good point. Like if we're thinking back towards like a long time ago, like in a
Hunter-gatherer
hunter-gatherers
societies.
in the tribe, like, the girls will need to be able to quickly be able to assess, oh, where can I gather food? Like, how am I making food? Like, what's going on? Like, where like the boys are like, I'm going to turn this rock into a spear, and like, I'm going to move around and get really my body all ready to go out and hunt. And like, so it is really interesting if maybe, intuitively our bodies are still kind of in that like zone.
For sure. I know there's a lot of studies that talk about the difference between a female and male brain and what they're doing. And I think it's very different. And it has to be different when they're little also. So that's the first. And we can just go through the other 2 developmental stages, and then we'll circle back to some more Waldorf stuff.
Definitely.
So when we talk about hands, head, and heart. So the next stage in Waldorf education development is 7 to 14. And that's where they call this the heart, or the, that's not the thinking, feeling. Sorry.
Yes.
This is the heart or the feeling stage of Waldorf education. So this is when a few things happen. You're going to be starting to incorporate way more. They call them the 3 R's: reading, writing, and arithmetic. I know arithmetic and writing don't actually start with R, but that's what they call them. And that's where you're starting to incorporate those things in Waldorf education. But the unique way that Waldorf education incorporates reading, writing, and arithmetic is through storytelling. So everything is done through a story, which is designed to speak to your heart. So you're learning how to read and you're learning how to do math and you're learning to do these things, not from a place that's just this cognitive information, but also from maybe you're learning about a certain culture, or you're learning about a certain saint or something like that while you're learning how to read, and you're also appealing to that emotional stage of a child where they're learning how to develop compassion, bravery, dealing with fear, friendships. They're learning all these things on an emotional level, and teachers through storytelling are incorporating those lessons into the reading and the writing and the math.
Well, and a fun little factoid about the stories in Waldorf education. I just want to say this because I like it. So the teachers don't use books, and they don't show pictures. They are just telling the story to the children, eye contact, hand movements, and the reason why is so that it will activate the children's imagination. It's what they design in their head based off of what their teacher is saying. And also along those lines, that's why the dolls don't have any faces. I thought that was super interesting. I was like, oh my gosh, yeah, they don't have any faces. So
they might have 2 dots for eyes or something like that.
Yes,
but the dolls don't have
Yeah. Yeah, so that, when the children are playing with it, they conceptualize what they want the doll to be doing instead of it having a smiley face. And it's oh, that doll is just permanently happy forever. That's all the doll is. It's just a happy face.
So the point is to create that imagination, to learn that feeling, right? To develop that feeling life, to develop their heart. Because that's so important. You want a well-rounded person doesn't only just know things, right? A well-rounded person has healthy emotional capabilities.
Yes.
What do they call it? Emotional coping skills.
Yes.
And they are able to will things. The healthy person can also do things with their hands to create things, will things into being. So I think that's so important. And I love that about Waldorf education. And like I said, in part 2, I'll share a little bit more of my personal anecdotes with some of that stuff, because I do have some memories of how that worked in my school.
And then what's the last?
The last one is 14 to 21. And this is where they call the thinking stage or the head stage, head, hand, heart. So I think this is really interesting that it's 14 to 21. And I think some people would criticize that and go, well, they should be learning.
I like that it's more than 18.
Yes.
Well,
yeah, because your brain isn't fully developed until you're 24?
Yeah, 24, 25. Yeah.
That's pretty
Some people, I can know looking back, I'm like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Brain development is not done until you are well into adulthood.
Yeah.
And so this last stage is the thinking stage. And this is where in Waldorf education, they really think that you are not ready for true conceptual knowledge and conceptual information until then. And I think that's so interesting because critical thinking, intellectual understanding, forming concepts and connections, now because you've done the learning through doing and the learning through your heart and your social and emotional learning, you are now have done the groundwork to really be able to critically connect and think things through. If you don't have that social emotional groundwork, you don't have that doing things over and over, how are you supposed to really understand something critically?
Yeah.
You can't. You're too emotional, you're too insecure to even know how to live in the world in any way. So I think that's super interesting, and I really like that. It doesn't mean that they're not learning practical math skills and they're not learning these things when they're younger, that they're not learning in any science, or they're learning these things in Waldorf education. Some people think that they're not teaching them anything before they're 14. And it's no, they're still learning a lot of that stuff, but they're not focused on intellectual, critical, intense thinking until they're old enough to really start to go there. And I just find that fascinating. And it also gives me almost like a break with my 6-year-old, because I feel like in today's culture, it's almost like you expect a 6-year-old to like conceptually understand all this heavy stuff sometimes, and like it's protecting childhood, in my opinion, like really protecting kids should be allowed to be kids as long as possible. And that doesn't mean we shelter them from the world, but we don't have to force these really gnarly concepts on our little kids.
For adults.
That are for older children and adults.
So I think one of the last things that we should talk about, because I find it really interesting comparatively to public school, is like the flow of Waldorf schools. Yes. So they call it a rhythm, where compared to public school, that they call it a schedule. And if you think about it, a schedule is very rigid. We do this from this time. We have to move on. We need to go ahead and go this thing, this thing, this thing. Where in Waldorf school, they call it a rhythm for a reason, because a rhythm is very fluid and it can change, and it can
speed up.
It can slow down. Like it's very flexible. And so that's another thing that we incorporate in our classes that we're inspired by, is the rhythm. I love that.
I totally agree. I really like rhythms. And you can also, as a homeschooler, establish like daily, weekly, and seasonal rhythms. So every day we have a general rhythm within our home. We have a weekly rhythm within our home. We have a seasonal rhythm within our home. And like you said, it doesn't have to be exactly the same every day, but there's a general in-breath and out-breath to our classes, to our general homeschooling lifestyle that I think is really healthy. And that's something we can talk about with rhythm, and is that Waldorf really encourages those in-breaths and those out-breaths. And what that means is, if you're going to take a kid and you want to teach them this math concept, so
this is going to be the in. Yeah.
This is something you're going to take them in and get their focus, and take some time to do that. And Waldorf really understands a child development, and that if you want them to have that focus, after you get your point across, you need to give them an out breath. You need to let them breathe for a second. Whether that's draw something, go play, color, jump out of your desk, whatever it might be. You're not constantly all day long expected to focus and have it. Like, I feel like public school kind of does that in some ways. It's like in breath, in breath, in breath, in breath, pay attention, stay right here, versus like giving them some time to process.
Yeah. Well, and for in breaths too, just for our listeners, I always thought this was a really nice little easy trick to remember when I was learning my early childhood education. So children's ability to focus, you take their age, and that's how many minutes you have. So if you have a 5-year-old, you have 5 minutes where their brain is capable of being able to focus. And then they're going to need an out breath, because that's all they got. And so if you have a 2-year-old, you got 2 minutes.
2 minutes.
Yeah, you got 2 minutes. So, and like intense focus, like that's literally all their brain can handle.
Well, I think that's actually even great for thinking about a 10-year-old, because you have 10 minutes.
You got 10 minutes. Yep.
And people, I think, expect a lot more of older children sometimes. And I still think that makes a lot of sense. The other thing that I forgot to mention in some of all of Waldorf education, this goes through all the ages, is arts integration. So Waldorf education integrates art into everything. So if you are learning a story, if you're learning how to read, you're learning how to write, you're learning math, they are painting or drawing or doing something artistic to go with it. So this is really interesting. Like, I actually have a really cool Waldorf ABC print in my house for Charlie. And instead of it just being your typical A, B, C, D, E, F, G, each letter is a picture, something that has to do with A. So the first letter A is like an angel. And so say you're learning your ABCs, you're going to
Is the angel like in the form of an A?
In the form of an A.
Oh, okay.
And that was, I think, some of the theory behind Waldorf teaching with the letters, is that a lot of the shapes of the letters had to do with
the
pictures. And so that's where the letter forms came from. So it's a very natural way to learn letters, is to add it to a picture. I think it's really cool. And I also think that they did this for geometry is really interesting because geometry has so much to do with like angles. And in Waldorf education, they draw these like beautiful geometric pictures and stuff. And there's all of this like,
if you haven't
Waldorf
looked it up, if you look up
amazing.
If you look up one thing, look up Waldorf chalkboards.
Waldorf blackboard.
Blackboards, yeah, because they're always
There's an Instagram account called Waldorf Blackboards, and it's literally just hundreds of beautiful blackboards.
Yeah.
And that is how they teach a lesson. So every day when you go to class, and this is something I can talk more about, there would be a drawing on the blackboard, and you would draw that into your own notebook, and then you would be maybe writing alongside what that drawing was. So that's such a part of the education all throughout. Is they integrate art into everything, which encourages that feeling. It also helps you feel like I accomplished something. When you draw a picture from start to finish, you have created something. It can make you feel emotional, feel successful. And it also is just fun. It's entertaining. It's intrinsic motivation to learn something when you get to incorporate beauty and art.
Definitely. And then just to circle back around to complete the thought. So with Waldorf, we have the in-breaths where they're learning, and then the out-breath is where they get, I guess, like a break is this way to put it simply. They just can go and do something that is not having to focus.
The same way.
Same way.
Yeah, there's a couple other things that are just interesting about Waldorf schools. One of them is that teachers usually move through grades with the student.
I'm so jealous of this as a public school teacher.
Cool.
Oh my gosh, I would have just that would have been so different if I would have been able to move up with my class. The amount of things that I learn about my students in a year, obviously I'm spending 6 hours with them 5 days a week, is just, it's hard to pass on to another teacher. Like, and then they have to start all over again. It's just not very effective. So if I would have been able to stay with my students, that would have been like, we would have gotten probably a lot more done.
So much more done.
Because I know them. I know the way they learn.
Everything is established.
Yes. But no, I had to start over every year, which was very difficult.
So in early childhood, in kindergarten, which you technically usually do 2 years of kindergarten in Waldorf also, you usually start a little bit younger and then you do 2 years of kindergarten. I did 2 years of kindergarten and then you move into the grades. And the grades is when the teacher stays with you. So in first grade, whoever your teacher was, in the school I went to, I believe they go all through high school. So you literally have the same teacher and usually the same group of like 20 kids, 25 kids and the same teacher your entire like educational career. So talk about like a village, talk about getting to know people, talk about like a real community. It's not just like you're cycling through different people all the time. You really stay connected to this core group and this one teacher. Something else that's unique to Waldorf education in a lot of ways is they have a lot of like rituals and celebrations throughout the year, which I think is really cool. So for example, we do this at Acorn School. There's birthday celebrations. They, in a Waldorf school, at least in my experience, you do your birthday celebration. It's like just you on your birthday. We do it because we don't have classes every day. We do just one at the end of the month. But they do really special things, including like a special storytelling during your birthday celebration. There's also different like seasonal celebrations throughout the year. And for me, that was really cool because there was just these big festivals, we call them festivals, to look forward to throughout the year, these celebrations that we got to do within our community. So we've incorporated that into Acorn School, and we actually do one a month, whereas a traditional Waldorf school doesn't even do them every month. I don't think they have them like kind of placed throughout the year, but we do some kind of celebration and festival as a community. And I think the kids just love that.
They're so fun.
To just
play. And also too, what I like about our festivals is because we have, 6 classes. When we have our festival, kids get to see kids that they haven't seen before. Or
families get to meet
each other. So it truly is a coming of the community together. So
yeah, I just think that's a really neat part of Waldorf education too. And I'm just gonna I would say there's like maybe 3 more principles that we didn't talk about just to wrap this up. I think we've hit a lot of the things that make a Waldorf education. Waldorf, once again, we aren't the experts. There's so much. You could even go into just the weeds with everything. Why do they round corners and why do they do that? There's so many things you could talk about with Waldorf education, but I think we're just trying to hit the main high level things. And then if you are interested, you can do deeper dives yourself. And I could actually put some books that you could read if you're interested. I can put those in the show notes or on our blog.
Yeah.
But a couple things that I think to mention at the end is I do think that Waldorf education strives to create social responsibility. There is a big reflection on you do want to teach people or to be whole children that also are going to reflect in the community and help the world. And I just think that's a really neat thing about it is that the point isn't just like for you to get ahead and for you to be the winner. Because I feel like that's like our culture in traditional public school is like win, 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 be the best, get the best grade, get to the best school, you, make
well, it's
the
a lot
money.
of comparisons. And even like in public school, we have tried to cut back on situations that would cause comparisons, but just the way that it's structured, it's just gonna happen like intuitively with the kids.
Well,
like even like with
is just set up that way. Like it's all about you, and it's not about the greater community. And there's a curriculum balance, I think, with Waldorf that creates that. They really include academics, arts, practical skills, so that it's really a well-rounded education, not just
that's why it's holistic,
a cognitive education. So I do think the sense of like the well-rounded education, well-rounded children, there's a social awareness and responsibility that they encourage children to participate and like help their communities. And I also think that it fosters a lifelong learning. So like a love for learning and a love for knowledge and creating new skill sets versus how quickly can I get this done so I can pass the test so then I can forget the information. I think that the point really is to create a love of learning.
Totally.
And so I think those are things that are really unique about the Waldorf educational approach. And I love it. I think it's such a great philosophy. And in our next episode, we'll be talking more about my personal experience with Waldorf education.
Yeah. Thank you for joining us.